I stepped through the front gate of the family house expecting a normal weekend visit, but the air hit me first. Thick, tense, sticky with something unspoken, the kind of heaviness that makes your skin prickle before your mind catches up. I knew instantly something was wrong. A faint cough drifted from the back hallway. Not loud, suppressed, like someone didn't want to be heard. I followed it, each step tightening something in my chest. That's when I saw them. Auntie's worn slippers placed neatly outside the storeroom, a room we used to fill with paint cans, broken stools, and rusted cleaning supplies. Never a place meant for a human being. I opened the door. A flickering bulb buzzed overhead, throwing spasms of light across the cramped space. And there she was, Aunty, curled on a thin mat laid directly on the concrete, her pillow nothing more than towels folded into a small, trembling mound. Damp cardboard leaned against the wall, the smell of mold mixing with the sharp sting of the menthol ointment she rubbed on her knees. She tried to smile when she saw me, but embarrassment tightened the corners of her mouth. "Beta, you came early," she whispered, pulling her shawl closer like it might hide the truth. I stepped back out in shock just as two of my cousins strolled past, cackling. "Found her new guest suite?" one of them snorted. "Good for her," the other added. "She should be grateful she even has a roof." They said it loud. They wanted me to hear. My blood boiled. "Are you serious? She's sleeping in a storage closet." Oh, they smirked like they were watching a child throw a tantrum. "Relax," one said. "She doesn't own anything here anymore. She signed off the deed. No rights, no say." "Aight." Before I could fire back, Aunty stepped out behind me, her voice small. "Here, please, don't start anything." Her hands trembled as she smoothed her clothes over and over, the gesture of someone trying to shrink themselves into invisibility, trying to erase whatever dignity she still had left before someone else tore it away. Then my uncle appeared, big, loud, and irritated, like just seeing her outside the doorway offended him. "What are you doing out here? Back inside," he barked, pointing into the storeroom without even looking at her. "Don't wander, you get in the way." And she obeyed, because that's what years of humiliation do. They train you to disappear. I watched her shoulders fold inward, watched her slip back into the tiny room like she was returning to a cage, and in that moment, something cold and sharp rooted itself in my chest. This wasn't just wrong. This was unforgivable. Later that night, as I walked toward the front door, I heard a crash in the kitchen, followed by my cousin's laughter. "Old people should stay out of the way," one of them jeered. I froze, every detail burning itself into my memory. The way they said it, the sound of Auntie's stifled apology, the dismissive laughter that followed. Humiliation feels different when you witness it, not as a story, not as gossip, but as a human being crumbling right in front of you. And I knew, as I stepped out into the night, that I wasn't going to ignore this. Not this time. The next morning, I sat beside Aunty at the edge of the porch, the early sunlight catching the silver strands in her hair. She looked fragile, smaller than I remembered, like the humiliation from the night before had carved something out of her. I asked her, gently at first, to tell me the truth behind the deed. She hesitated, eyes fixed on her hands, fingers fidgeting with the end of her dupatta. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath. "I gave it up. Years ago," she whispered. "He said if I didn't sign, he'd leave me with nothing but shame." The words hit me like a slap. "What?" She went on, each confession peeling back a layer I never knew existed. She told me how she had worked 2 jobs for decades, cooking in a school cafeteria in the mornings and cleaning offices at night. How every mortgage payment came from her hands, not his. How my uncle gambled away his earnings while she quietly patched the holes, figuratively and literally. "He didn't know," she said. "I paid all of it. I thought if I didn't cause trouble, he would change." But the change never came. Instead, she signed the house over during a moment of panic, A moment when he yelled that she was ruining the family, that she was the reason everything fell apart. She thought giving him what he wanted would stop the chaos. It didn't. Oh. She told me how he slowly cut her off from everything, her friends, her relatives, her spending money. He belittled her in front of others, then convinced them she was weak, dramatic, dependent. He rewrote the story, she said, until even I started to believe it. Then came the detail that made my chest tighten, the night of my high school graduation. She had worn long sleeves in the summer heat, smiling in every photo. She had been hiding bruises. She didn't tell anyone, not because she trusted him, but because she didn't want to ruin my moment. Her voice cracked when she spoke about her childhood. "My father taught me that silence is dignity," she murmured. "That peace is worth any sacrifice, even yourself." She looked away, ashamed of the lessons that trapped her. "I thought enduring made me strong," she admitted. "I didn't realize I was burying myself." Then she told me about the betrayal that shattered her completely. My cousins, smiling, helpful, pretending to assist with paperwork, handed her what they claimed were temporary tax documents. She signed them without reading. They were the deed transfer. "They tricked me," she whispered, "and they laughed when I found out. Like it was a joke I wasn't smart enough to understand." She reached under her bed and pulled out an old envelope, fat and worn. Inside were handwritten receipts from every mortgage payment she'd ever made. Photos of her on the roof, fixing leaks alone. Scraps of evidence documenting a life built with her sweat. She laid them in my hands like sacred artifacts. "Near Turtenmoor, Akar. This is all I have left," she said. As I flipped through them, realization settled heavy and cold in my chest. What happened yesterday, her being shoved into that storeroom, wasn't new. It wasn't sudden. It was just the latest bruise in a lifetime of invisible wounds. When I looked up, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of them, but fear of what would happen if she finally stood up. If she fought. If she dared to reclaim what was hers. And right there, I felt something inside me ignite. If she couldn't fight alone, then she wouldn't have to. Her fear didn't scare me. It fueled me. The next few days felt like watching a slow-motion cruelty show, every moment worse than the last. I kept my eyes open, documenting everything, even when it made my stomach twist. My cousins barked orders at Aunty like she was hired help they didn't have to pay for. "Aunty, wash the car. Aunty, mop the hallway. Aunty, make tea, hurry." My uncle shouted from across the house for the smallest things: misplaced keys, missing socks, cold food he never told her he wanted warmed. They forced her to cook full meals, scrub bathrooms, and even wash their cars in the driveway, the water spraying over her swollen fingers as she tried to grip the sponge. I watched her wince every time she pushed herself up the staircase, knees trembling beneath her, and not a single person moved to help. Not one. One afternoon, I walked into the living room just in time to hear my cousins laughing over her medical prescriptions. "She's so high maintenance," one sneered, waving her medication bottle like a prop. At dinner that night, my uncle leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth, and announced loudly, "Once the old lady's gone, I'm remodeling this place. Finally make it look modern." Everyone laughed, loud, careless, cruel. Aunty stared at her plate, blinking hard, forcing a smile that cracked at the edges. I couldn't hold it in. "What's wrong with you all? She built this house." My uncle slammed his fork down so hard, the sound sliced through the room. "Stay out of grown-up decisions," he snapped. My cousins chimed in, twisting the knife. "Yeah, why are you even interfering? You don't even live here." Or are you after the house too, trying to grab a share you never earned? Their eyes were accusing, poisonous. It wasn't just hostility, it was fear. They saw me noticing things they wanted hidden. Later, I heard a crash from the hallway. I walked out to see my cousin pushing one of Auntie's old photo frames off the shelf. The glass shattered across the floor. Sentimental junk doesn't belong here, he said, stepping over it. Auntie quietly bent down to clean the shards, her hands shaking. That night, through the paper-thin door of the storeroom, I heard her crying. Not loud sobs, quiet, controlled, like she was apologizing to herself for feeling hurt. The sound sat in my chest like a stone. Nafi, I started secretly recording everything. Every insult, every threat, every moment she was forced to sleep on that cold concrete floor. I captured the way she winced, the way they barked commands, the way my uncle towered over her. I documented her living conditions, knowing evidence would one day matter. Then one evening, while she napped, I searched through her old documents, boxes taped shut and hidden under her old saris. And there, buried in the bottom of a worn envelope, I found something that made my pulse quicken. A missing clause. A technical detail. A crack in the armor. A clause that, if absent in the final deed transfer, could make the entire thing invalid. Before I could dig deeper, my uncle appeared behind me near his study. His voice dropped low. "Stop digging where you don't belong." His eyes were sharp enough to cut. But I didn't back down. I just closed the box slowly and walked away, pretending I found nothing, pretending I wasn't already planning the beginning of their downfall. The next morning, he gathered everyone in the hallway. "The storeroom smells now," he announced casually. "She'll sleep on the porch from today." The porch, open to cold nights, humidity, mosquitoes, like she was a stray animal to be moved around whenever inconvenient. Auntie just nodded. No protest, no expression. But I saw it. A flicker, a shift. The exact second something inside her snapped quietly but irrevocably. This wasn't about respect anymore. It wasn't about dignity or family or compromise. This was about survival. And as I watched her turn away without a word, I realized something with a clarity that felt electric in my veins. The revenge I was planning wasn't just mine anymore. It was hers. The phone rang suddenly, shattering the quiet morning like a warning bell. I picked it up and a familiar voice came through, an old family friend, someone who had worked as a junior lawyer back when Auntie bought this house. His tone was cautious but urgent. "I've been looking into the property records," he said. "Everything shows. The original mortgage was paid entirely in her name. She was the sole legitimate owner before that transfer." I froze, the words echoing in my skull. Fraud, coercion, a crack in the wall they thought was unbreakable. "There may be legal grounds to reverse the deed," he continued, "especially if you can prove coercion or misrepresentation. But you'll need everything. Every abusive act, every financial record, texts, witnesses, everything." Adrenaline surged through me, a hot, sharp pulse that made my hands shake. This wasn't just a chance. This was the opening we had been waiting for. I found Auntie sitting at the kitchen table, the morning light falling across her face, highlighting the wear of years and quiet suffering. I sat beside her gently. "Auntie, there's a real chance," I said. "You can reclaim everything they stole from you." Her eyes widened. "But what if they—" Her voice trembled, fear tightening her throat. I reached for her hand. "We'll be careful. Every move measured. You're not alone anymore." At first, she slumped, shaking slightly, panic flickering across her face. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she squared her shoulders. Her chin lifted. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but firm. I want my house back," she said. The words hung in the air, fragile yet explosive. "We met with a lawyer, a meticulous man who scanned the documents and nodded gravely. 'Yes,' he said, 'her case is stronger than we imagined. If we proceed carefully, the deed can be challenged, but you must remain silent. Do not alert the family until every piece is ready.'" I didn't hesitate. I began recording secretly, the uncle's voice admitting, "I tricked her into signing papers she didn't read," and my cousins boasting on video, laughing, "The house is ours now, no matter what the old lady thinks." Auntie watched the recordings with trembling hands. But it wasn't fear this time. It was fury, sharp and rising, tempered with sorrow for every moment she'd been forced to endure. The next day, small changes began. She reclaimed her photos from dusty corners, placing them carefully on shelves. She walked taller through the rooms, speaking in firm tones, correcting misplaced objects, asserting her presence. My uncle noticed the shift instantly. He tried to intimidate her with harsh words, with scowls, with the same commanding presence that had kept her silent for decades, but she didn't flinch. In that moment, I realized something profound. The power dynamic had already shifted. They still thought they controlled the house, controlled her. But the truth was clear, undeniable. She had begun reclaiming not just her property, but her life. And they didn't even see it coming. We filed the case quietly, carefully. Fraud, coercion, emotional abuse, unlawful transfer. Every document reviewed, every witness lined up, every recording organized. Not a word to them, not a single leak. One morning, a courier arrived with a thick envelope addressed to my uncle. He opened it at the breakfast table, and I watched his face drain of color, the first crack in the armor he had built over decades. My cousins erupted in confusion, shouting, demanding answers. Their questions bounced off him as he stormed toward Auntie's room, voice sharp and accusing. "How could you betray us?" he barked. Auntie didn't flinch. She stood tall, shoulders square, chin lifted. "I'm not betraying anyone," she said. "I'm reclaiming what was stolen from me." The first hearing was packed. Relatives whispered, neighbors leaned forward, and old family friends who hadn't seen her in years watched, shocked by the revelations. Every eye in the courtroom felt the weight of the injustice. I presented the recordings, Auntie's living conditions, her forced labor, the moments she had been reduced to hiding in a storeroom. Gasps rippled across the room. The atmosphere shifted. The air thickened with disbelief and shame. The lawyer played my uncle's recorded confession. His words echoed off the walls. "I tricked her into signing the papers," followed by the cousins' arrogant laughter, their mocking comments. Their arrogance crumbled under the spotlight, their smiles gone, replaced by disbelief and fear. Auntie stepped forward with decades of receipts in her hands, every mortgage payment, every repair, every effort she had made alone. Silence fell, proof laid bare. The judge's gaze turned on my uncle. Questions came fast, answers stumbled. Sweat dripped down his temples. His voice shook with every reply, every excuse unraveling under scrutiny. My cousins tried to shift blame, pointing fingers at each other, twisting words, but each lie contradicted their previous statements, their own confessions, their recorded arrogance. When the judge asked why Auntie had been forced to sleep in a storeroom, my uncle muttered excuses so weak they made the entire courtroom recoil. The judge's voice cut through the tension, sharp and final. Reprimands for elder abuse, misrepresentation, coercion echoed in the hall, a sentence of truth to punish decades of silent suffering. The verdict came down. The deed transfer was nullified. Ownership returned fully to Auntie. The room seemed to exhale collectively. Well, a separate order required my uncle and cousins to vacate the property immediately and compensate Auntie for damages. Outside, reporters captured their angry, impotent outbursts. Behind them, Auntie walked past quietly, dignified, chin lifted, a woman finally unshackled. Back at the house, my cousins packed in furious silence, avoiding her eyes. Auntie stood in the doorway of her bedroom, fingers tracing the walls, touching them like greeting an old friend, a place that was always hers. She turned to me, tears brimming in her eyes, yet her stance unbreakable. Her voice was soft, but filled with triumph. I finally came home. Days later, the house felt different. Lighter, almost breathing again after years of suffocation. Every corner seemed to exhale, every hallway stretching towards sunlight. Auntie moved back into her master bedroom, her belongings arranged with care, no longer hidden or scattered. Every photograph, every vase, every book returned to its rightful place, not shamefully, but with quiet dignity. She began repairing the parts of the house that had decayed under their rule. Walls were patched, curtains replaced, the garden brought back to life. She touched each corner with reverence, as if reclaiming not just a house, but every lost moment of her life. Neighbors began visiting, carrying flowers and apologies, faces heavy with regret for not knowing what she had endured. Distant relatives called, shocked, supportive, their voices affirming the strength and worth that had always been hers. My uncle and cousins avoided the neighborhood entirely. Their arrogance and control had collapsed, leaving silence in their wake, a void filled only by the life she was reclaiming. Auntie began attending community gatherings again, rediscovering herself beyond survival. Each step outside was a declaration. She existed. She belonged. She was no longer hidden. We framed her final mortgage receipt, the last payment she had made years ago, and hung it in the hallway, a quiet monument to the truth she had lived, paid for, and finally reclaimed. One night, as we sat together in the glow of the living room, she confessed softly, "I used to fear dying unnamed in my own home. Now," she said with a faint, proud smile, "I finally feel like I exist." She began journaling, chronicling the journey, not for revenge, but for healing. Each word a stitch, mending the years of silent suffering. We celebrated her first peaceful sleep in decades. No storeroom, no porch, no fear, just the quiet comfort of belonging. I realized then that revenge had never been the end goal. Restoration was, and Auntie stood restored, whole, unbroken, finally home. The sun was dipping low, painting the porch in golden light. I set up the camera, my hand steady despite the weight of the story I was about to tell. Behind me, Auntie moved slowly through her revived garden, watering each plant with care, a quiet testament to the life she had reclaimed. I began speaking, voice steady but heavy with emotion. I recounted the first time I saw her in that storeroom, the humiliation, the helplessness, the moment something inside me broke, refusing to stay silent any longer. I reflected on how quiet suffering hides in plain sight, how the people we love can carry invisible wounds until someone finally chooses to notice. Coercion isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears the mask of family, culture, duty, whispering rules that aren't laws, but feel impossible to break. The truth is simple. Auntie never lacked strength. She lacked someone willing to stand beside her when the world tried to erase her. I spoke of the turning point, the phone call that opened a door, reminding me that silence is the fertilizer for injustice and action is the seed that grows justice. I described the courtroom, the moment the truth finally drowned out decades of lies, the sound of her name spoken with power instead of dismissal. The lesson was clear. Dignity stolen in private can be reclaimed in public if courage is placed where fear once lived. I reminded viewers that elder abuse often hides behind closed doors, invisible until someone speaks. That speaking up, witnessing, refusing to look away can rewrite a life entirely. I let the camera linger on Auntie, smiling quietly in her own home, a place she had built, paid for, and finally fully won back. I turned to the lens, letting the words land heavy and true. If you've ever watched someone you love shrink under someone else's power, be their witness, be their voice, because sometimes justice starts with one person refusing to look away. I invited viewers to like, subscribe, and share because stories like Auntie's demand to be heard, passed on, remembered. The camera faded out on the soft sound of her humming, a melody that belonged to her garden, her home, and her life, the life she thought she'd never see again.